Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to you all. Today, I'm very pleased to have Harriet Hole with me. Harriet is actually a fully qualified accountant. Having worked in corporate finance and innovation, she then spent time in a large practice and PCN, so she feels your pain with the challenges you face. Having done a number of practice meetings earlier in the year where the teams were struggling to achieve a healthy margin on their drugs, I thought it would be helpful to ask Harriet along to talk about how practices can improve this. I know that some of you have attended the Ash Lane webinars and the face-to-face sessions with us over the years and found them really useful. And quite a few of our clients have benefited from their one-to-one support or the Compass offering, which I'm sure Harriet will talk about. If you have any questions, please do pop them in the Q&A section and we can cover these at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Harriet. Thank you.
Thanks, Kay. It's great to be here. Hello, everyone. So let me share my screen, which we can hopefully see there now. So I'll be talking to you today about transforming your drug profits. There are three reasons that we are seeing drug profits declining. That can be due to the declining margins from reduced discounts from suppliers, the NHS dispensing fees also declining in real terms, and then also increasing errors in real terms, increasing errors at every point in the process from reimbursement to the claims themselves. So to address that today, we're going to look at how to calculate your drug's profit margin. And that's not just at the practice level, but also at the individual drug level, so that you can then identify points for improvement where things can be addressed. While we're going through this, please do use the Q&A box, because like Kay says, if you have seen this before, then I'd be really happy to make it work for you. So do jump in with any questions as we go through. Very briefly, a bit about who we are. We were formed in 2012 by Tracy and Richard Hole. You'll be noticing a number of repeat surnames here. We are a family business. So Kay's already mentioned my background. I won't go through that again. But we have also got a really expert team, including some dispensing managers and other financial and operational expertise as well. Ultimately, our aim is to increase your drugs payments and profits, but it's also about putting you back in strategic control and making use of your data to ensure that you know what's going on in your practice. And we work with nearly 500 practices every single month in doing that. So without further ado, let's introduce the topic. We're dealing with personally administered items. Now, this is the drugs, medicines, and devices that you are purchasing and then administering to your patients in the practice for which you are reimbursed. There are lots of things that fall into this category, but it's not always clear-cut what is in and outside of this definition. So it includes vaccines, anesthetics, injections, GnRH drugs, so that includes Prostat, Decapeptyl, and Zoladex, some coils and implants, but not all of them. So, all coils and implants, apologies, but it's Nexplanon is claimable from the start of this year. So previously it wasn't claimable. And then it's some sutures, but not all of them. And then it's only your 6mm by 75 steri strips as well. So anything that you're claiming from Inform is not claimable because that's not being purchased. So these are items that all practices will be buying in. If you're a dispensing practice, the drugs income also includes your dispensed items. We won't be dealing with those today. It's equally, if not, it's as important, but we would address that in a separate session. If you'd like more details on that, we can discuss that another time. So to know how you're doing with your drug's profit, you need to be able to calculate it. Now, it may be something that Kay and the team have already shared with you at the practice level, which is fantastic. However, to be able to increase the overall drug's profit figure, you do need to look at each individual drug and its relative contribution. To do that, I'll introduce how the drug's payment is calculated, and that's in the green box on the screen. So, you take the basic price. So all drugs have a basic price, which is determined by the NHS drug tariff, and a discount is applied to that. It's a discount the NHS is effectively giving themselves, and it's a percentage of that basic price. It can be between 3.17 and 11.18%, and that depends on the total amount of, or the total sum of the basic price you are claiming in that month. So if you have a higher basic price that you're claiming, the discount applied would be at the higher end, so more like 11.18%. Then VAT allowance is added back. That's 20% of your basic price less your discount. And then a dispensing fee is also added back. This is determined by the number of scripts that the GP is claiming in that month. It can be between around £2 and £2.40, but that number does change every 6 months. So it will be changing again in October what the kind of parameters of those dispensing fees are. So that's how you calculate the drugs payment itself. And that's underpinning those drug statements that you're receiving every single month. But then to arrive at the profit on that, you would deduct the cost that you are purchasing those drugs from the suppliers, including the VAT. It's important to note that although you can get most of your drugs at the basic price, so the cost, the amount they're being reimbursed for, some suppliers do charge more than that, so you do have to be vigilant there. Once the cost is deducted and you found your profit, you arrive at the profit margin by then dividing that by the drugs payment amount and timesing that by 100 to get your percentage. Now, the target drug profit margin for this financial year for practices is 20%. Last year, it was 25%. We do see it declining for those reasons I mentioned at the start, but things like flus are also impacting that as well because the cost of your flus is going up, but the margin on those is going down. But once you've got that figure, you can then determine what steps, if any, need to be taken to improve that and also maintain it as well. So let's look at those kind of 3 rules. These are the 3 rules that we would share with our practices to make sure that they are maximising their drugs profit. First, make sure that you're claiming for everything. Second is to make sure that you're paid for everything. And third is to optimise drugs and manage the suppliers. Now, we'll talk about each of those in turn. Let's start with the first one, make sure everything that is claimed. So this is a bit of a schematic of what's going on in your practice every single month. Your drugs are being ordered, given by all of your clinicians, hopefully coded in the clinical system, and then the FP10s, those green pieces of paper, are being printed and collated into the salmon FP34 sheet. There are a lot of people involved in this process. So as a result, things will inevitably get missed. We see examples of things not being claimed because either they don't know that they're claimable or they don't think they're worth claiming. We see searches as a really important tool to identify where things should have been claimed but weren't. However, they can be out of date or misinterpreted as well. And then a big one that can crop up is items getting lost in the post. It sounds ridiculous, but a particular practice that we worked with missed £170,000 in claims because they just weren't reaching PCSE. I think they were being sent to the wrong address at that point. So it is a really important part of the step, another thing that can crop up. Now, with all of these things, there are sort of steps that you can take to make sure that you're claiming everything. Firstly, make sure that you've got a robust FP34 process. So that means that it's clear what is happening every single month, and that is a repeatable thing. Using searches, like I mentioned, that's important, but making sure that the team using them is trained in how to use them as well. Then make sure that everybody is claiming for everything. So even the low-cost items, and I'm going to talk more about why that's so important later on. You can produce a list of claimable items as well to help people remember the things that they should be printing an FP10 for. If you need help with that, we do have some resources. You can always follow up with an email and I'd be happy to share those with you because it's something you can just print out, put in the treatment room so that they remember to claim. And then finally, make sure that you send it using Royal Mail tracked 24 hours just to avoid it getting lost in the sorting office. So that's the sort of, the first step in the process, really. Then it's about making sure that everything is paid. So after the FP34 is sent to prescription services, they will process that and then it is paid by PCSE 2 months later. There are things that can crop up in this process where we've seen examples of items being missed, GPs being paid to, for example, a previous practice, dispensing fees sometimes either being underpaid or not paid at all, or the wrong drug being paid. And we would define this as revenue leakage. So that could be small amounts of income that aren't being paid, that accumulate over time, or it could be a one-off payment that is missed or underpaid. That just go completely unnoticed, because most practices that I speak to, after the claim has been sent off, they are not checking or not able to check whether the payment is correct. But it is really important. So there are some things that you can do to sense check whether that payment is around the level that it should be. And that's what we call revenue assurance. So firstly, check PCSE and make sure that you have a statement and a payment for every single month, that none are missing. You can also look for those spikes in the flu season. So in the flu season, when your flus are being claimed, there should be a higher payment that you're receiving that roughly matches that. If you want to take it a step further, I would also recommend having a look at your drug statement, checking the number of items that you've been paid for, and just referring that back to the claim itself and verifying whether or not, all of the items have been paid. Now, Kay did say I might mention it. I will briefly, because we are short on time, mention that we at Ash Lane can support you with this. So for our nearly 500 practices, we are doing these checks for them every single month and reconciling their payment back to their claim to the penny. And like I say, a handful of our practices are affected by some of those issues flagging on the right every month. It's not to say they're all affected, but these things can crop up. So it is an important check to do. Now, the third rule is to optimize your drugs and manage your suppliers. Drugs, like I mentioned, are generally available at the same price as the NHS basic price, but only if you're buying them from the right suppliers, and others will charge a premium. So we often see that the person doing the ordering is different from the person responsible for the claims and the finances, and therefore they're not always clear on how much they are being reimbursed for those drugs. So as a result, it's very easy to inadvertently overpay for them. There are examples where Depo-Provera, for example, has been purchased for 3 times more than its basic price. The basic price is £6 and a penny, and you can purchase it for that amount as well. So it is something that requires care when it comes to drug purchasing. Like I say, it's often done by separate teams. And in a lot of instances, we see that the nurses are tasked with doing the ordering. But that can be a challenge because they've got lots of other competing priorities. So doing price comparisons isn't always the best use of their time. I've actually worked in a practice while they were going through the process of taking the ordering from the nursing team into the admin team. And I can see that it takes time. It takes process changes. There's lots of change management that comes with that, but it is a really important step because the admin team then have visibility on how much they're being reimbursed, and they can also do a bit more of that price comparison as well. So where possible, moving the ordering from the nurses into the admin team will help with managing the suppliers from a cost perspective. Also, generally speaking, there are better suppliers for cost. Those are what we refer to as the kind of big 3. So that would be AAH, Alliance, and Phoenix, also called PSUK. Generally speaking, you can get the best prices for your drugs from those suppliers. However, there are a few things to be aware of that I appreciate that checking all of the drugs one by one can take work. So to start you in the right direction, I will introduce a general rule of thumb. So the general rule of thumb is what we call the £30 rule. And broadly, due to the dynamic nature of the calculation that I showed you at the start, where you've got that discount that's deducted, which is a percentage of the basic price, and then the dispensing fee, which is added, which is a kind of fixed amount. What that means is the calculation favours lower cost drugs. So lower cost drugs are generally more profitable. The cutoff for that is around £30. So once you're looking at approximately £30 plus, those drugs are less likely to be profitable, more likely to be loss-making. And I've illustrated that here. You can see that, where you're looking at a drug with a cost price of £30, you then pay VAT on that of £6. but your reimbursement, let's assume it's the same, that it's also £30, you'd have your deduction of approximately, well, in this case, £1.80, and the VAT allowance added back, as well as the dispensing fee, resulting in a break-even payment. So that means that special treatment needs to be taken, special attention needs to be taken to those high-cost drugs when it comes to managing your suppliers. So let's look at some examples of this. Let's look first at a low-cost drug. So lidocaine is a good example of that. It costs £4.06 for a 10-pack, so that's around 40p per item. Now, I mentioned earlier, low-cost items are sometimes considered not worth claiming, but this is just to demonstrate they absolutely are. Because where you've got a 40p item, you're not only getting that 40p reimbursement, you're also getting the dispensing fee. And what that means is your profit margin on a 10-pack of lidocaines is approximately 83% or £24. So really worthwhile to claim those. Then let's look at a high-cost drug and apply the same, general rule of thumb. So an £87 11 libido dose would result in a loss of £3.82. So this is just to show that generally speaking, your high-cost drugs will be less likely to be profitable and therefore require more attention. However, with every rule of thumb, there is an exception. There are some exceptions to this rule, which I will just mention now. If we were to look at Mirenas, so Mirenas have a basic price of £88 and you can purchase them for £88. So the assumption would be it's also loss-making in the same way as an Libido. However, that's not the case. And the reason being is that your contraceptives you only pay 5% VAT for, but you get the full 20% VAT allowance back when you're reimbursed it. So therefore, when you're looking at things like coils and Nexplanon, you are receiving around a £9 profit for those. So yeah, just something to bear in mind. And then similarly, when we look at GnRH drugs, so these are clinically interchangeable. You could use a Prostap or a Zoladex or a Decapeptyl. And therefore, the discount that suppliers offer on them is really competitive. And I've put the sort of most competitively discounted one here as an example. Prostap has a basic price of £225, but the profit on that is over £100 per item because such a substantial discount is offered on that drug when you purchase it from Alliance Healthcare. So a lot of practices think they shouldn't purchase drugs like this because they're expensive and therefore, can have a big impact on things like the practice's cash flow. But they are missing out on the potential for additional profit. So a 10,000 patient practice would generally have around 11 patients on Prostap. So they're missing out on roughly £4,400 profit to the practice based on how many they'd be giving per year to those patients. That does, however, only work if rules 1 and 2 are in place. So are you claiming for everything and are you paid for everything? But if you are, then it's absolutely worthwhile to be looking at those drugs and kind of considering what's profitable as against, just looking at the cost associated with them. So those are the kind of 3 rules with the general rule of thumb. And there are some bonus rules that if we have time, I will go into. But before we do that, I just want to take a moment to focus on flus. The reason being is your flus are generally your most important drug. If you're prescribing only practice, they will represent half your drug's income. So it is really important that your flus are done correctly. And we've got flu season approaching very, very close now. So I wanted to just take a moment to focus on this. So when we look at applying these rules, well, making sure that you're claiming your flus is really important. And you can do this by monitoring, how many you have in stock versus how many you have received and, ordered and received. And that missing gap should be at the amount, the difference between the two should match up to the number that you have claimed. What's really important is also claiming the right flus. And I'll speak about that more in just a moment. The second thing is making sure that you're paid for your flus. You can review your EPAC2 data to do this. If you don't have a login, you can request one. That's something that we'd be happy to help with if needed. And you can review how many flus you've been paid for and also the brand of the flus that you've been paid for too, to make sure it's the current season and the ones that you've purchased. Now, the third rule is about managing your suppliers. There's a couple of things to mention on this. We are often asked whether flus are still worthwhile to do. And the answer is yes, if they're done correctly. They are still profitable drugs. The profit is going down though. What's really important is that when you're ordering your flus, which you're probably doing for 26, 27 at the moment, do your own calculations on the profit. Apply that calculation I shared at the start. And the reason being is that we are seeing that suppliers don't always apply the discount that you will have deducted when you reimburse those flus. So the profit is being slightly overstated. So by doing those calculations yourself, you will be better informed before doing your purchasing. But also what's really important here is to minimize the wastage on your flus by not over ordering. Don't just order based on the previous number that you did. Look at how many you actually used, because that's a much better determinant to minimize the wastage on the flus, which is a really important factor in making sure that you run a profitable flu campaign. So just looking at the current flu season. So these figures on the screen at the moment are your previous flus, assuming that you're, we're looking here at the Securus over 65. So last flu season, the reimbursement was £13.50 and the overs were purchased for roughly £11.20, excluding VAT. The profit margin on that was 23% or £3.91. This year, the flus are changing. So instead of an AQIV, it's an ATIV. And the refund, the amount you're reimbursed for that is £17.55. So that's gone up significantly. The cost has also gone up proportionately by more. So you're now paying £15.25 for those over 65s. The result of that is that your profit in pounds hasn't changed significantly. It's a tiny bit lower, £3.53. The profit margin is significantly lower at 16%. So even if you do everything exactly the same for this flu season, your profit margin on your flus will go down. That is outside of your control. It's just to give you, firstly, assurance that that isn't something that you've done wrong. That is just part of the process of the flus changing. But it also does emphasize the importance of applying those rules to make sure that you are paid for all of the flus that you are doing. You do still get your enhanced service payment on top of that of £10.06. It didn't increase for the adult flus, unlike the fact that it did for the childhood flu. So yeah, you're still getting that, but it hasn't increased this year. But the most important thing, the main thing I want to emphasize for today is that with flu season approaching and the flu's changing, it's vital that you claim the flu that you are using. So the way that I recommend that you do this is before you submit your appendix with your flu vaccines on, which is likely to be in the next 6 weeks or so, take a box that the flus have arrived in and write down exactly what's written on the box. So, you aren't just copying last year's flu. It is exactly what's written on the box. And that will ensure that you are paid that £17.55 instead of the £13.50 you were paid last year. It's the most important thing that I would just hope that you take away from today's presentation. Now, I do have some sort of bonus tips, but I will just check before I go into those whether there are any Q&As. Are there any questions? Here we go. So I can see a couple in there.
There are. Yes, there are. So we have a question. Do you have a comprehensive list of claimable drugs? And could that be sent out to people?
Yes. So we do have a list of claimable drugs. There are a number of ways to look at, what I can do is I can send you the list of commonly claimed drugs. Now, these are the ones that will be claimed by most practices, and it may be that there are more on there than what you need to include on your own sort of poster for your treatment rooms, but you can tailor that to match what it is that you need. So what I can do is I can send our sort of commonly claimed items, which is a bit of a poster, and then we have a more comprehensive list as well, which is perhaps too much information, but as you've asked for it, I'll be happy to send it.
Super, thank you. The next one was, could I ask you do you provide a supplier list of where is lowest cost, which is a bit more tricky because they're always changing their amounts, aren't
Yeah,
they?
it's a good question, and so for users of our service, which is Compass, we do as much work as we can on the costs. We don't share a definitive list because, like you say, Kay, the prices can change, stock availability also changes. But when our clients join us, we do a bit of a review of identifying where there can be improvements made, and then we also have sort of ongoing support for that. So I'm happy to have a conversation with you about how we might be able to work with you to kind of support that. It isn't always as easy as producing a list, which is why I'm kind of generally touching on those three main suppliers as worth setting up an account with if you don't already, and just doing a bit of a comparison with those three.
I think sometimes it feels for practices, doesn't it, that people are trying to trip them up at every point in that process.
Yeah, it does feel that way. Yeah.
With the refunds changing all the time, supplier costs changing, trying to be on top of looking all the time. So I suppose actually a question from me, Harriet, which is, I know I've been asked before, do you have a rough guide to the cost of the Compass service? Because I know some practices have been weighing up, okay, is it worth us investing our staff time in this, or actually is it better for us cost-wise in the long run to outsource that checking with the Compass service?
Yeah, of course. So unfortunately, I don't think I've got a slide that I can share on that, so apologies for that. But happy to talk about that. So for Compass, this is our monthly ongoing checking, not only of your payments, but also we can include profitability calculators for both your individual drugs and your flus as well. And if you're prescribing only practice, we charge £60 plus VAT per month for that service. Generally, I would say those checks are really important, and that's why I've emphasized them in this presentation today. But I would imagine we can usually do it more cost effectively at that £60 than the kind of staff time it would take to do a comprehensive check internally. But we don't tie practices into long-term contracts with that. So you can try the service and see if it suits you. And then for those Compass users, we also will always do that back claim. So we look back over the last 6 years, we identify personally administered items that could have been claimed but weren't, because it is a 6-year look back that the window is. And if you're a Compass user, we charge only based on what we recover. So if we don't find anything, the charge wouldn't apply, but it's 21% plus VAT on the amounts we recover and identify for you. So those are the sort of two, I guess that hopefully answers your question, Kay. And then the additional service we also do is bespoke training and searches as well, which we kind of do as an additional piece to those, which I'd be happy to follow up with anyone that's interested in.
That's brilliant, thank you. That's all the questions there are at the moment.
Great. So in terms of, I think we might be actually coming to an end, mightn't we, Kay? So I guess, looking at Sarah's most recent comment, in terms of the resources I can share after this, it would be those lists of the claimable drugs and these slides. But if there's anything else that anybody would find useful, I'd be very happy to follow up with that as well.
That's super. Yeah, and thank you for your questions as well. Those that have popped some questions in the chat, that's great, because it's really helpful if we've got some questions that are going to help everybody.
Well, so I guess
I suppose one. Oh, sorry, Harriet.
I just wanted to re-emphasize the importance of that claiming the accurate flu. This is something that we've seen practices impacted by from the last time they changed the flus, and we'd estimate it to have had an approximately £3 million impact on all of the practices in England. So it is a really important thing to be looking at.
Super, thank you. And I suppose from my perspective, one thing just to mention to practices listening, when we come in and prepare the accounts, it's really important that you are coding the drugs that you can claim and the other bits and pieces that you can claim for, that you're coding those to the reimbursable purchases codes, and that any items that you can't claim are either going into a separate code or your surgery requisites code. Just make sure that the cost code for the reimbursables is very clear from the other costs that you are incurring, because that gives a true representation then of what your margin is on those. And don't forget, if you're trying to look at it during the year, those reimbursements are coming in 2 months in arrears. So you're always looking at what you bought in 1 month compared to the income in 2 months' time, but also taking into account those stock movements as well.
Yeah,
that's brilliant. Thank you, Harriet.
Touching on my bonus rule there of good bookkeeping. Thank you, Kay. Well done.
We've just been asked, you have to share the slides after the meeting as well.
Yeah, of course.
Super. Thank you. That's brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Harriet. That was a really informative talk, and hopefully everybody's found that useful. Just to mention, there is a feedback form that will be coming out when we finish the session. Also, the link that you've got that you've joined on to watch it live, you can use, give it a couple of hours, you can use that then and see the recording of it. So if anybody, I know one person messaged they were having a job to join, so hopefully they have joined now, but I did message just to let them know if anything had happened and they didn't get on, they can watch it on catch up, or they can watch the beginning on catch up. Also, just to mention, on the feedback form, please do pop on there if there's anything else that you would like to see us delivering in terms of training sessions and webinars. We're very happy to do that. And also just to mention that we do have another webinar, and I am just checking, I think it's the Wednesday, the 8th of October at 10:30 a.m. and that will be Christine Newitt covering VAT for VAT registered practices. So the invites to that will be coming out shortly. So please do sign up for that if you're a VAT registered practice and would find that helpful. So thank you ever so much, Harriet, for joining us. That was really, really helpful.
Thanks very much.
Goodbye and enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Bye.